Welcome back to TFA Mysteries, the show where we dive in to answer the lingering questions left behind by the cancellation of Transformers Animated. Yeah, TFA Mysteries was promised to have 6 monthly installments from January 2021 to June 2021. I may have crashed and burned there, but luckily my channel is small and no one cares, so I'm not losing sleep. Anyway, let's go. We're finally done with audience-submitted questions. Now we're gonna address the questions that I wanted to ask series story editor Marty Isenberg. All of which are about the development of the prematurely cancelled 4th season. Why was the show cancelled? Which episodes would have been in the season? And we're gonna discuss what every named speaking character might have been up to during a canned 4th season. Let's go. First, I asked Marty something I've been wondering for a while. What was the actual timeline of Season 4's production?
That's an easy topic. There was none.
What was the actual timeline of Season 4's development? So we wanted to know, when in the production pipeline did you find out the show wasn't getting renewed?
So it was sort of a lengthy, drawn-out process, if I'm remembering it correctly, and it was 15 plus years ago, some of it. So a little, some of it is a little fuzzy in my memory, but my recollection is that seasons 1 and 2 we went straight through without a break. Like there was a 26 episode commitment plus the movie, and then there was a little hiatus between seasons 2 and 3, where I was, just to kind of backtrack, I was never an employee of Cartoon Network or Hasbro. I was strictly on a freelance basis, so I was paid a flat fee for being story editor on the show and development and for the scripts I wrote. But they did give me an office at Cartoon Network, even though I wasn't an employee. So I had the use of the office so I could be around the production. I could be there with Matt and Derrick every day, and it was just a better setup in general. So what I had done during the hiatus between season 2 and season 3 is I kept coming into the office because there was always new animation coming in, so I wanted to see it. And there was a little bit of preliminary development for the next season that they wanted me to be around for, but mostly I was working on other projects. So a lot of them coincidentally were Cartoon Network projects. So I was around, but I wasn't getting paid to be on Transformers specifically. So the gap between season 3 and the alleged season 4 was very similar, where I was working on another Cartoon Network project, and sort of in my spare time we would have some meetings and some brainstorming sessions about what we would do for season 4. And so there would be a meeting with Hasbro and we would discuss what their needs were. There would be a meeting with just me and Matt and Derrick, and we would discuss what's our wish list of things. And so we would present our wish list to Hasbro, and Hasbro would come back with, well, these are our toy needs, and so we would adjust that. So I think we went through a number of iterations of what season 4 might look like, none of which I got paid for, by the way.
Oh, wow.
But with the understanding that there was going to be a pickup. And it dragged on. I remember it dragged on for a lot of months. I think we had finished the writing of season 3, early summer, and we weren't expecting to hear anything about a pickup until the fall, September, October, and that kind of dragged on, and it went all the way into the new year. And it wasn't until like around January of 2009 that they finally said, "Sorry guys, we're just not doing it." But it did drag on for a very, very long time.
Let's start talking about the characters. In middle school and high school, I used to create a comprehensive list of every speaking character in every single show I watched and mark down how many episodes they spoke in. Transformers Animated had 116 credited speaking characters.
That is to say, in the end credits of the series, across all 42 episodes, there are 116 distinct names. 10 of these characters are falsely credited. They are in the credits, however, they plainly don't exist in any of those episodes. I've known this for years, and also I've recently rewatched them to double check. They're simply not present. This means that they were likely in the script and probably recorded, but their scenes got cut either during boarding or animation. That leaves us with 106 credited speaking characters. If you remember back to our discussions in TFA Mysteries episode 4, you know that Starscream's male clones were never credited as individual characters due to the limited voice budget. Because they are distinct characters, we'll add these guys back. That brings our total to 112. Finally, we'll include 8 important characters who didn't speak and didn't have voice actors, most of whom were mute, but still had notable and memorable roles in the series. With 120 characters on our list, we're ready to start.
If you remember, Season 3 managed to incorporate every Cybertronian character from the first 2 seasons into its major storylines. Would this trend have continued? Or is it possible that some of the characters we like would have been cast aside to make way for the new characters? Let's find out. We're going to separate this into 7 groups and ask the questions one group at a time. First off, the main cast. When the show was starting and first being marketed, there were 5 main Autobots, 5 main Decepticons, and 3 main humans. By the 4th season, Ironhide, Jazz, and likely Shockwave could be confidently added to this as well. Would they return in Season 4? Of course. I created the recently released TFA Mysteries number 4 back in July, and in the time since then, the long legendary Trial of Megatron script reading has been publicly released. The madmen at TF Nation and their unparalleled iMovie editing skills have brought the full cast recording of the loose outline for the first 3 episodes of Transformers Animated Season 4 to YouTube permanently. And all of these guys, except for Fanzone and Black Arachnia, show up in the episodes. And everyone, except for Sumdac, is mentioned in the outlines for the preceding episodes. Prime, B, Ratchet, Ironhide, and Jazz would have been in the main cast on Earth. Megatron likely would have gone power crazy, turned on his Decepticons. TFA Mysteries episode 4 was about how Starscream was planned to recruit Lugnut, Blitzwing, and Shockwave to his side to take down Megatron. Sorry and Bulkhead might have had a Shattered Glass adventure. Prowl might have had an episode where his spirit has to possess characters brought to life by Allspark fragments. Fanzone was slowly getting written out, only speaking in 2 Season 3 episodes, but he did have 1 showcase episode proposed for him, Gremlins and the Gears. Black Arachnia, meanwhile, had a whole slew of pitched adventures that we spoke about in TFA Mysteries episode 2. We can say all of them are very likely. Next, we'll discuss the Cybertron-based Autobots. Most of these are in the Trial of Megatron as well. Sentinel is name-dropped in 2 other pitched episodes for the 4th season, Allsparkalypse Now and Process of Elimination. The same applies to Rattletrap, who might have been given a showcase episode called This Is Why I Hate Organics. Additionally, Cliffjumper appears on the thumbnail art for Process of Elimination, which seems to indicate he's considered for that episode. Whether he was to be the culprit, just a red herring, or even considered for the episode at all is unknown. We have no information about Hotshot, Brawn, and Red Alert in a 4th season. I'm sure they would have at least been extras again, but there's no way to know for sure. Now what about Highbrow? Highbrow is the guy who appears during the Omega Supreme flashbacks in Transwarped.
I am. Let's move. Transform and roll out, soldier.
According to the Almanac, Highbrow was the head of Autobot Intel until he mysteriously went missing after the Great War. Luckily, up-and-coming Autobot Longarm was available to take his place. Now, the Almanac isn't always a reliable source of information, because it was written by fans, and this isn't stated in the series itself, but this has been stated and approved by series art director Derrick J. Wyatt as being their intention. So it's safe to consider this authentic TFA material. This implies that Highbrow is offline. Were their plan is to bring him back? Probably not, since the show had all but moved on from the long arm arc. But keep in mind that 50% of the stuff that made it into the series wasn't planned either. As these episode scripts were developed, there might have been more flashbacks or opportunities. While it seems like a likely no, it's impossible to make any sort of definitive statement. Yokotron is deceased. My recording script originally said, George Takei is likely too expensive to get twice, but then I remembered that this dude is literally in everything. Around the same time, my man George Takei appeared in Quarry in the House as a chef who gave the president terrible diarrhea.
Air Force 2, duty calls.
So upon reevaluation, he's probably one of the easier actors to land in LA.
Oh my.
But anyways, the writers might have had flashbacks, who knows? Not the writers, because the season wasn't written. We'll mark him as indeterminate as well.
Let's talk Warpath. In the trial of Megatron's outline, Diatlas leads an army of cyber ninjas on one of Cybertron's moons. At the time Marty Isenberg was writing these, very few cyber ninjas had had their bodies designed in the series. While many of them had heads designed for 5 servos of doom, only these guys had their bodies designed, many of whom were ineligible to fight in this battle. As such, it's reasonable to assume that Warpath would have made his way into this fight, as the show liked to use its existing character assets as frequently as possible. Oh my god, Warpath is not a cyber ninja, he's elite guard. I looked it up, I thought he was a cyber ninja my entire life. Everything I just said was a lie, I'm so sorry. We have no information on Warpath. No way to tell. Indeterminate.
What about Blurr? Well,
Blurr's appearance in Transwarp Part 2 was going to be his final appearance in the show. Here are some clips of the crew speaking about it.
I don't know that, I mean, when we were planning out the season 4 that never happened, I don't know that we had any plans to,
He didn't come up
to show him.
To bring him back.
He didn't come up.
Apparently, John Mosquito Jr. and Derrick J. Wyatt had mixed feelings about the writing decisions and worked very hard to save him, to no avail.
I know he was upset.
John Machida was, yeah.
He was begging us.
When he read the script.
I was able to find Derrick's tweets from the day that Transwarped came out. It's well known that Derrick included Blurr Spark on the animation model of the compacted cube, his last-ditch effort to save him, but it didn't show up in animation.
I was going along doing this model tonight.
Fresh Blur.
Yeah, design this Blur, being smashed. Okay, cool.
But
and then
you gave him an out, right?
Yeah, I tried to put his spark in there so it's still on, but then Cliffjumper throws it down the incinerator.
I don't know if it really reads on screen.
By all accounts, the crew had no plans for Blurr to return.
It'd be great. It'd be a great backup story to a comic someday to see
how he survives. I think if we got enough, fan petitions or something, we might have.
Yeah.
Luckily, Derrick got his chance 6 years later. At BotCon 2015, Marty Isenberg threw together The Return of Blurr, a script which took advantage of the voice cast present at the panel, giving one of our furthest glimpses into the TFA timeline, in a story in which Sorry combines with the Blurr Cube, uses his powers to defeat Crimzeek, and brings Blurr back to life in his own body. No, this was never intended to be an episode. Much like the Stunticon job, this was created specifically for a panel, but it is canon, and it's completely accepted by the show's original staff, unlike many things in the Almanac.
so, with 2 chunks of characters addressed, let's jump back to questions about the 4th season's cancelled development. Why was the show cancelled?
The show was canceled because they were focusing on their hub network, right?
More or less. I think that's why it got dragged out, is they really weren't sure what they wanted to do. They knew they wanted to they wanted to have more of a partnership with a network. I think at some point, at least they were telling us that there was some discussion with having some greater partnership with Cartoon Network. That obviously never happened. But somewhere in there, the negotiations with Discovery Networks must have been happening, but they couldn't talk about them. So I've heard retroactively that there was some consideration that before they would jump into Prime, that they would give animated one more season rather on the hub, and it was considered for a while, but ultimately they decided not to. So that's, again, not much was communicated to us on the animated crew. So it's some of it is just stuff I've either speculated or just kind of pieced together from what people have told me. So
that's what I've pretty much gathered from a lot of interviews you've done. Alex and I, we found this one article from 2009, back when like it wasn't revealed yet that the show wouldn't be renewed, and it's like no word yet, but we have received word that Marty Isenberg has emptied his desk at Cartoon Network, and we read that, we're like, oh, that's so sad.
Yeah, that was actually something that wasn't supposed to be reported. I was once there was no need for me to be around, I had to vacate the office. So, and I wouldn't be able to use my Cartoon Network email. So as a courtesy to, pretty much everyone on my contact list, I said, hey, this email will no longer be good. I can be reached at my home email. And one of the fan sites kind of jumped on that and reported it. And we got in touch with them very quickly, and they took it down because we didn't, that was not for public consumption. That was simply as a courtesy for my contacts. So I was not happy about that.
They were onto something. Reported. Was Endgame always named Endgame? The last episode of season 3?
Yeah, that was always the name. I mean, even season 2, there was no guarantee that we would be getting a season 3. So we had to have some sort of finality to it, even if we left some threads dangling. So we always had to be prepared for this to be it. Okay. Pretty much from the end, from ending season 2 and from ending season 3, with the hope and somewhat of an expectation of a pickup, but no guarantee.
Cybertron-based Decepticons. So, just Team Char. Well, Team Char appears in the trial of Megatron. In part 2, they attack an Energon farm. In the Stunticon job, an alternate version of Team Char is introduced, including Mindwipe, Skybite, and Blot. However, they were created for that comic. Had the trial of Megatron debuted in 2010, there's no reason to think they would have changed the team's roster for no particular reason, especially given the extremely limited character design budget the show was working with. If the show were to continue in the present, however, who knows? Nowadays, all of these characters exist and anything is possible.
You know who probably would have shown up in season 4 though? The characters who were originally designed for a deleted flashback sequence in Transwarped, those being Straxus and Reflector. These models had been finished for the storyboarding of Transwarped, they just didn't make the cut in the end. So since they were just lying around, it's more than likely that they would have made their debut in season 4 when extra Decepticons were needed. Just to clarify though, they're not part of the 120. That was just a little tangent, sorry.
Human villains. Easy. The human supervillains were unfortunately phased out of the show. Hasbro requested that the human characters be eliminated after season 2, but on top of that, the show itself had outgrown them. It was no longer Transformers meets Teen Titans, as Sam Register originally pitched. It had developed its own identity and frankly no longer needed them. Meltdown's unconcluded storyline is often talked about as a tragic source of dissatisfaction. What was he gonna be up to after getting hit with a genetic modifier? Would he ever create an all-organic Transformer?
Meltdown, the acid guy, I assume he probably was done, because...
Yeah, I think that pretty much by the time we got to season 3, we were done with the human villains.
That's what I figured.
Not necessarily resigned ourselves, but we, committed to, this is a Transformers series. We're not, it's not superheroes in a city anymore, really.
Even if Transformers Animated had gotten a 4th season, it's likely that this would have been the last we saw of Meltdown. The show had lost interest in his storyline, and Hasbro didn't want to spend time with him any longer. Porter C. Powell was in a different camp. He wasn't a supervillain, he was a businessman, and because of this, he survived Hasbro's mandate, and the writers still enjoyed him. He remained relevant as the secondary antagonist of the Human Error two-parter. As such, I don't know if we can write him off as easily as the other guys, but we don't know of any specific plans. As such, we'll mark him as indeterminate.
I have one last question for Marty before we move on to an overview of the 17 episodes and discuss which ones would have made it. What did these meetings and discussions about the 4th season look like? How many specific dedicated meetings and discussions were actually had about the 4th season, during that wait for the pickup or maybe late season 3?
Yeah, it was ongoing. I think it started with, I think it was a process similar to what we did on season 3, which was, I was there at the office. So, Matt and Derrick and me would go to lunch and just talk about what do we want to do for season 4. And, we had a few leftover story ideas that didn't get done in season 3. So we put those in the hopper. And we talked about some other things that things that I wanted to do story-wise, things that Derrick wanted to do character and design-wise, and we put together a document with a proposed season arc and some story ideas, and sent that off to Hasbro, and then they came back. They came back and pretty much gave us the marching orders that there were certain things that they wanted to conform with the live action movies, just to keep that keep that connection, and other story ideas that they wanted to do. So then we incorporated that, and I think we probably did about 3. I went back through my files. I think we did about 3 drafts of a document of a season 4 proposal.
And speaking of that season 4 proposal,
Next, I asked Mr. Isenberg which specific episodes would have appeared in the 4th season of the show. After all, we know of 17.
all episodes on this list come from the Transformers Animated Allspark Almanac 2, the Transformers Animated Complete Allspark Almanac, the Transformers Collectors Club Issue 71, and the 2 more obscure episodes, Truck vs. Monkey and the untitled Flash Forward, have been mentioned by Derrick J. Wyatt during appearances at Auto Assembly 2010 and BotCon 2011, respectively. We discussed them at length in TFA Mysteries Episode 2.
Seeing as every previous season was picked up for 13 episodes, it's safe to assume that the 4th would have been as well.
All of those were stories that were under consideration at one point or another, but I don't believe all of them were under consideration in any one single document. So I think some of those stories, as I was saying, some of them were leftovers from season 3 that we thought, let's see if we can incorporate them into a season 4. Some of them were, just story ideas that me and Matt and Derrick just sort of pitched around among ourselves. And then some of them were stories that we developed as a result of Hasbro's needs. So that document is kind of a mishmash of probably the 3 documents that we put together, and some of them, there's some information on there that's just wrong.
Is there?
It just was not in any of the documents. I don't know where it came from. I don't know what your source is.
A lot of them are from like Derrick's interviews.
And
Okay.
Yeah, so 2 of these are just what I've written based on Derrick interviews, and the other 15 are from a Transformers Collectors Club issue that I believe Derrick worked on. So
Okay.
yeah, those are 2 that I compiled, and then
some of that has stuff that's not in any of the documents that I have. So I think over the years the legend has grown as to what actually was season 4.
Yeah.
And it was an evolving thing. I mean, even what I would call the final document was still something that was going to be subject to change.
Absolutely.
I think season 3 is a perfect example where we started to do a season a certain way, and we got 3 episodes in, and then they put the brakes on, and we totally had to rejigger at least the beginning of the season.
Yeah, Transformers.
And the tendency in all the seasons was things were pretty loose and open-ended, because if we discovered something in a story as we were doing it, a lot of times things would then branch off of that story rather than some proposed roadmap that we had in our heads that we felt we had to conform to. We liked discovering things as we went along.
You know, out of these 13, like these 17 proposed episodes, if there were 4 of them that you would cut to make it 13
I think there are probably more of them that we did cut because they weren't, you know, as the document evolved, certain stories got taken out. So I think the Flash Forward, Truck versus Monkey, Steam, Came from Cybertron, those were all ones that I think we had pitched in season 3 as well. So I think those were the first ones to get yanked when we had to develop other stories to conform with the concept that Hasbro gave us. So Mirror probably would have gotten cut as well, just because it's one of those standalones that was almost done for season 3, and I think we had to because of the way trans worked, it ate up another episode. So I think that was the one we yanked. I think we got as far as maybe even an outline. I know we had assigned a freelance writer to the episode and then had to give him something else. So that one got cut more than once.
Okay. Oh, you're so close.
Let's hop back to characters. Earth-based Autobots. Grimlock, Snarl, and Swoop appear at the end of the trial of Megatron as Kaon crashes into the water. On top of that, the description of the proposed Season 4 finale, Megatron Must Be Destroyed, mentions them. There's no specific mention of Wreck-Gar. However, the episode All Sparkalypse Now was pitched to include Prowl's ghost hopping between all of the characters brought to life by Allspark fragments. The options then are Wreck-Gar, the Constructicons, and the Starscream clones. Given the TFA crew's absolute love for Weird Al, you've gotta believe Wreck-Gar would have wound up appearing here as the script developed. But keep in mind, the specific characters that Prowl would have possessed in this episode probably haven't been decided whatsoever. My instinct is to put likely, but since that's mainly conjecture, we'll mark a Wreck-Gar as indeterminate. Earth-based Decepticons. Not all of these guys are Earth-based, but you know what I mean. Let's start with clone number 3370318 and clone number 2716057. These names were given to them by the Almanac as references to Futurama, but they were not named this in any official production materials.
Hey, Brobot, what's your serial number? 3370318? No way! Mine's 2716057!
I don't get it.
We're both expressible as a sum of 2 cubes! Woo!
They're dead. They're gone. There's 6 other clones to keep track of, and the odds of a flashback to Fistful of Energon seems unlikely. I mean, we can't be 100% certain of anything. There's no reason to assume that these characters would have returned. We'll mark them as indeterminate for professionality's sake, but like, come on, no. We talked about all of the other clones in TFA Mysteries Episode 4. Slipstream would have resurrected Starscream, and the plan was for the 2 of them to gather an army to take down Megatron. Ramjet and Sunstorm appeared in Trial of Megatron. Whether or not they would have survived being thrown into the reactor has never been decided. There were no specific plans for Skywarp and Thundercracker, but Marty says they probably would have been brought back eventually. If Black Arachnia was to return, there's no conceivable reason why Waspinator wouldn't either. On top of that, he is specifically mentioned as a major character in the pitched episode, Process of Elimination. He would have come back.
What about Lockdown? He's not mentioned in any of the Season 4 materials that have been released. However, Derrick has posted sketches of an Autobot Lockdown, and I believe through this tweet he is insinuating that Lockdown was intended to be a Trypticon prison guard at one point. Was that an idea pitched for the show? For Season 4? Or is that something that Derrick only came up with more recently in the time since the show? Let's check.
Lockdown probably would have come back because he was such a fan favorite character, and Andrew Robinson always wrote him, so I'm sure we would have found a lot of
I saw a sketch of Lockdown as an Autobot from Derrick a while ago.
Yeah, that wasn't anything that we had specifically planned, but as I kind of leafed through the old documents, I don't recall We had a specific lockdown story. So
I figured.
he might not have made it into season 4.
What about Soundwave, Ratbat, and Laserbeak? Soundwave is mentioned in the premise for an episode called Steam, and Derrick has stated they were trying to incorporate Soundwave into Megatron's forces eventually.
We wanted to have Soundwave eventually join Megatron's team.
And what about his army of guitars?
They would continue to grow his musical instruments, yeah.
Laserbeak and Ratbat, however, aren't mentioned. Now, there's no reason to assume they wouldn't have come back, but for the sake of true professionality regarding this delightfully pointless subject matter, we can only mark them as indeterminate. But, come on, yeah. Swindle is a juicy character. He disappeared with a ton of Elite Guard supplies at the end of Decepticon Air. Was that storyline actually important enough to follow up on? Were there plans? Let's ask Mr. Isenberg.
We loved him as a character. We probably would have found a place for him in season 4, but I don't remember that we had a specific story for him in season 4, so he might not have showed up anyway.
And finally, we'll discuss the Constructicons. They're mentioned in the outline for Turf War, and Scrapper actually appears in the Trial of Megatron. But what about Devastator? The desire was very clearly for Devastator to combine during Turf War. However, in a toy-based show like Transformers, the writers don't always get their wish. Let's see what Marty has to say.
Well, yeah, and it was always in flux because of whether or not we could do Devastator or some limited version of Devastator. I think someone had come up with a sketch. It might have been Eric. Had come up with a sketch of how to incorporate the two Constructicons, Dirt Bus, and Bulkhead into something like Devastator, but not quite as elaborate.
Yeah, that makes sense with the budget limitations.
But it was always up in the air, so we didn't want to get too far down the road with it, just to have them say, no, we can't do it.
Looking past Marty for a second, here is series head toy designer Eric Siebenaler weighing in on his thoughts.
It was a funny toy line because it had a delay in launch because they were still coming off the movie 1 toys, and then we're kind of ramping up for movie 2. So animated kind of got sandwiched by the movies, and everything got truncated, and I think in large part because of what was happening with the movies, and then also what was happening behind the scenes with them trying to start their own studio, Hasbro at the Hub studio and stuff like that. So everything was just kind of shaking around and making a toy that we knew was going to be a $50-$60 toy was not something that they wanted to commit to at that time.
Yeah, I think there were a few decisions that sort of got nixed economically, but we still kind of pushed them story-wise just in case.
Yeah.
Like we were planning to do a combiner with the Constructicons.
Yeah.
And we always left room for it, but ultimately it just was going to be too expensive to do.
Is it entirely possible that had the show got a 4th season, it still could have gone and went without Devastator appearing?
Probably. I think that is a likely scenario.
At the end of the day, there is no way to truly know what would have happened because it never did.
Let's hop back to Marty Isenberg and continue talking about the development of the show in general, but more specifically the 4th season. Yeah, that's what I was wanting to say. There's this misconception within the fan base that there's like 17 fully written episodes that all would have been in the season. And I've thought about it. It's like, I think probably a lot of these would have been cut. I have to imagine.
All right. So.
Oh yeah. They were cut even before we got a green light on production, which we never did. The only ones I did a detailed outline for Trial of Megatron. Which we did a reading for at the most recent TF Nation.
Yes. Really quickly, I guess this flash forward episode may have been cut. Was there a title for it at any point?
I believe the title was Bumble Prime. I mean, that was just something that came from Derrick. I think he even had a sketch of what Bumblebee would look like as a Prime.
Oh, wow.
And,
Okay, and then also just a quick question: were there any Decepticon only episodes in the pitch?
Yeah, I mean, Tangled Web may have ended up being a Decepticon only episode. I think in general, they always wanted to see at least a little bit of Autobot presence, even if it was a Decepticon themed episode. So I don't know. A lot of these questions could only be answered once we got the green light and once we had meetings with freelance writers and beat out the stories in more detail.
It was all very up in the air.
Yeah. I mean, this was, this was a very bare bones, framework of what we thought could work as a season, but we always like to keep it vague because we wanted room to, like I say, make those discoveries and build off of things that happened, as we wrote them. I mean, a lot of season 3 built off of what we put in. Similarly, in season 2, a lot of things built off of what we set up in Auto Boot Camp, where we hadn't necessarily planned on using that to jump off the rest of the season, and a lot of things that carried into season 3. But the story lent itself to that, so we ran with it.
So we want to know if there were any specific writers attached to the episodes yet. I mean, you may have answered this.
No. Without a production green light, there was no reason to bring in freelancers yet. We would develop the story with the freelance writer.
Okay.
So that was all part of the process, but that wouldn't happen until we had a script order, because we're not going to bring in a writer if we can't pay them to do a script.
Okay. Thank you. This has been really enlightening. And then I think you already touched on this. So there were no real treatments for any of these episodes. They were just kind of pitches.
The only thing that existed in treatment form was Trial of Megatron.
Character power epic adventure time. Sector.
What's happening?
Section 7. Extras. This is the biggest chunk. All of the speaking extras. Every extra who had a line of dialogue in the series was named because that line would have appeared in the script, and TFA's voice actors got paid per character. However, they didn't have names like Jeff, they're named Truck Driver, Irate Citizen, Narrator. Needless to say, these aren't characters that the writers actually cared about, they were purely functional to move the story forward. Sometimes an extra appeared multiple times, such as Mom, Sparkplug, and Gary. Because extras weren't always one and done, any one of these guys could have hypothetically appeared again. That's why we'll mark all of these extras as indeterminate. There's no way to know. Probably 90% of them would have been done, maybe 10% of them would have come back or something. None of these scripts are written. There is, at most, a few paragraphs outlining what would have happened in each of these unproduced episodes. So Marty, sure as heck, doesn't know what extras would have had lines in them. The only extras I can think of that trend in a slightly positive direction are the Witwikis, simply because they appeared in every season. Also, my man News Reporter spoke in 35% of the episodes across seasons 1 and season 2, and then didn't speak at all in season 3. I'm not willing to watch him get erased like this. I'm devastated. I'm sobbing for real right now, guys. I can't. Oh my god. Oh, John. Poor News. Poor guy. Anyways,
I think some of the episodes may have been developed a little further than the information you have. Mm-hmm. But not by much. So we hadn't beated it out yet. So we didn't have a plan necessarily.
I think my main takeaway from my interview with Marty is that the phrase season 4 plans isn't necessarily accurate. For the most part, there were no season 4 plans, but there was all kinds of season 4 ideas. Many of these were contradictory. Most of these wouldn't have made the cut. Everything about season 4 is so hypothetical, but that's also what makes it so interesting.
I'd like to once again thank Marty Isenberg for his willingness to sit through this in-depth interview that we did way back in May or June or something. And thank you, the viewer, for watching the latest installment of TFA Mysteries. Be sure to like that subscribe button and subscribe to liking the video. Huge thank you for my Patreon supporters for sticking with me through these months of relative silence. Next time, In the final installment of TFA Mysteries, we're going to discuss what a 4th season could look like today, given all of the internal changes within Hasbro and the Transformers brand, and what it would take to get the show to return. I'll see you then.